Good morning. I hope you're doing well today. So today we're going to continue on this new series we started last week titled Misunderstood. And really it's pretty simple. The concept is we're looking at the miracles of Jesus and looking at what they reveal about who Jesus is, his character, his attributes. And how so easily, when Jesus was here on earth, and even in our own lives, we can misunderstand him. And why that matters is, and we've said this, and we'll say this many times throughout the series, but when we see God clearly, we then respond to him correctly. So what we do, how we respond, is fully dependent upon how we see him. So if I misunderstand him, if I see him incorrectly, well, then I might respond to him incorrectly. And so that's what we're doing by looking at this series, by looking at these stories as we work our way to the cross, to Easter. And so last week, we began the series by looking at the holiness of God. And the way we looked at it was the active presence of God entering the room. Not just this distance about him, not just that he's different than us, but that what happens when his presence is in the room. And we saw in Mark 1 that when Jesus stepped into the synagogue, holiness exposed what had been hiding there all along. And so when we're in the presence of Jesus, what doesn't belong gets exposed. Now, I thought about this week as we kind of worked our way through these stories and attributes. And as powerful as the holiness of God is, what it doesn't do is give us this bigger image of who God is or how we interact with him. Because when I think about the holiness of God, if I'm not careful, I will just think of how distant that makes me and God. Because he's holy, he's perfect, he's right, and I'm not. And so we have a tendency, if we're not careful, to let the holiness of God almost begin to make him seem rigid or distant. But we know clearly, and this is why God is not just one thing, he's all things. He isn't rigid, he isn't distant. And so today, what we're going to do is we're going to look at a miracle that reveals a side of Jesus, a side of who God is, and how he interacts with us. And so the miracle we're going to look at is in John 2, 1 through 11. And this is what is considered to be his first miracle, when he turns the water into wine. And the attribute, the characteristic we're going to look at today is God's generosity. How he is a generous God. Now, that word generosity seems like one we would all welcome, right? Because for someone to be generous means they give to us. They're giving to us. They don't hold back what they give. But think about you for a second. How comfortable are you with others' generosity? If we think about it, think about some of the things we say. Like imagine, let's say, when somebody buys your lunch, what do you say? Okay, next time it's on me. If someone gives us a gift that feels too big or that we didn't deserve it, what do we say? Oh, you didn't need to do that, or you shouldn't have done that. And especially when someone does something that's way bigger than we ever could deserve or give back, it begins to make us feel uncomfortable. No, I'm the only one? It's pretty normal, right? But see, why generosity can be uncomfortable is it disrupts the system most of us are used to. The idea that I do something for you, you do something for me. This is what we're comfortable with. Things feel more balanced that way. And so when someone gives more than expected suddenly, we don't know how to respond. And I think if we were really, really honest this morning, as much as we like the idea of God's generosity, we tend to be uncomfortable by it. We tend to take the same mindset we have with individuals and apply it to God. Now, we wouldn't say that out loud in church because that would sound foolish to say, I give to God and he gives to me. We know that's not true. But just because we won't admit it doesn't mean we don't live that way. Doesn't mean that we don't rely on our human interactions to interact with a holy God. And so today, what we're going to see is the generosity of God doesn't ask anything of me but to trust him. And there is nothing I can do to earn it, and he still gives it. But if we don't understand this piece correctly, we will respond to him incorrectly. And so what we see here in this miracle is, and again, look, this is a miracle that kind of seems small in comparison. This is a miracle that seems like, well, it's a wedding and they were just running out of wine. But the reason why I chose this today is because what we see is that God's generosity sees, one, what we can't, and is always willing to give more than we could ever imagine. And so what I want us to do is first, we're going to do two things. First, we're going to break down these verses. We're going to go through verses 1 through 11. And we're going to look at what this story is, look at the context, pull out the pieces we need today to understand this text correctly. And then we'll end today with, okay, so what does this mean for me? How then am I to respond to the generosity of God? So let's start with breaking down the verses. Let's first look at 2, 1 through 3. On the third day, there was a wedding at Cana in Galilee, and the mother of Jesus was there. Jesus also was invited to the wedding with his disciples. When the wine ran out, the mother of Jesus said to him, "They have no wine." Now, at this point, we know that Jesus has just begun his ministry and gathering followers. So at this point, it's believed that Andrew, Peter, Philip, and Nathanael are a part of his ministry. And so it's this small group. And before he does anything else, his first miracle he chooses to do at a wedding. Now, it's important to understand the Jewish culture and what a wedding was for the Jewish culture, because this is not, though we might find weddings to be important, it is different in this time. A wedding then would have lasted several days up to a week. And the groom's family would be responsible for providing everything, and everyone in the community would be involved. It would not be a small thing. And the responsibility of the family was to provide everything. Meaning, not just that they were going to do it, but they were going to do it well. That hospitality wasn't just seen as something nice you did. It was as important as keeping the law, not speeding, not breaking the law. Some believe that you could even be punished by law if you put yourself in a place to be hospitable and you weren't. So this is not just this casual thing for the wine to run out. This would have been public embarrassment. This would have been something that people would remember for a very, very long time. This would have impacted the way people interacted with them and seen them in their own community. So now let's imagine the scene. We're at this wedding. The music is playing. The celebration is underway. People are laughing and eating and talking. It's a joyous event. But behind the scenes, something is going wrong. John says, he words it as when the wine ran out. And again, it seems small, but we know and it wouldn't have been to a lot of people, but to a small group of people, this would have been devastating. And no one notices the problem really, except a few. And one of those was Mary. And Mary comes up to Jesus, and what does she say? They have no wine. And see, I think it's important for us to see here that Jesus chose to reveal his glory in a need that most people would have called way too small. I mean, this is just a small group of people. Yes, it would have maybe ruined this family's reputation, but it wouldn't have ruined the world. But see, I think it's important for us to understand that just because we assume that God only shows up in the big moments, that his generosity sees all our needs, all moments, and he meets the needs that we need right when we need it. It's hard to imagine because if I had the power to do big things, I would do it in big moments. I'm just being honest. I really like attention. And I like praise, and I like for people to be impressed by me. So I can assure you that my very first time I showed you how powerful I was would not be when only a few people could see it. But Jesus isn't looking to be impressive to the world. He's looking at meeting the needs of those that are there, because what he does is in this moment, he begins to reveal who he is to those who need to see it the most. Let's continue. So now let's look at verses 4 through 8. So now we see here, it says, Jesus said to her, "Woman, what does this have to do with me? My hour has not yet come." His mother said to the servants, "Do whatever he tells you." Now, there were 6 stone water jars there for the Jewish rites of purification, each holding 20 or 30 gallons. Jesus said to the servants, "Fill the jars with water," and they filled them up to the brim. And he said to them, "Now draw some out and take it to the master of the feast." So they took it. Now, I just want to give a quick understanding. It's not incredibly important here, but I want to make sure we understand the scripture. You might hear that and go, wow, Jesus is being a little rude to his mother. But I do want to make sure you understand, by him saying woman is not the same if I said woman today. If you ask me a question, I say woman, that's it. I'm done right there. I don't get any more words. But this would have been more like ma'am. This would have been a much more respectful words that he's using here. He's not being rude, even though it seems a little rude. So I just want to point that out. And what he's doing here when he says, "Do you not know that it's not my time?" He's just making clear, and he does this all through, every time he moves, every time he does everything, that this isn't about him. That he's not on his timetable, he's on God's. And what he's talking about here, when he uses that idea of my hour, we see this all throughout the gospel, pointing to ultimately when he goes to the cross and rises from the dead. So he's saying, this is not the moment, this is not my hour where everyone gets to see who I fully am. Now we know he's going to give glimpses and glimpses and glimpses. But he's making it clear, this is not just something I get to turn on and off and use as a parlor trick. This is about God's plan and God's glory. But it's important to see here that Mary doesn't argue. She doesn't try to get more understanding. I don't think she understood what's happening here. No one did. I think she knew more than a lot. But to say that she understood the details from beginning to end, I don't think, because his plan's way too big. This whole thing was too big for anyone to understand. But what does she do? She says, okay. She looks to the servants and she says, do whatever he tells you. And then it goes on to say, nearby there were 6 large stone jars. And I want to be clear here. I didn't bring this trash can up here to say that these stone jars were anything to do with a trash can. But this would have been about the size of the jar because it says 20 to 30 gallons. This is about a 30-gallon trash can. So I just want to be clear because sometimes we read these verses and the magnitude doesn't always stand out. So I want to be clear. He took one of these and filled it up, and then he took 5 more, meaning he took 6 of these. He didn't just give them a nice bottle of wine for a wedding gift. He gave them 6 of these, meaning that amount would have been around, I've got it written down here, 120 to 180 gallons of wine. In our world, up to about 600 to 900 bottles of wine. Just want you to understand, God's not stingy. When he gives, he gives. He fulfills the needs more than we could ever imagine. He then tells the servants, fill the jars with water. And he doesn't just say fill them with water, he says fill it to the brim. Well, why would that be important? Well, if I fill this jug halfway up and you come back with wine, you could have just mixed wine with the rest of it. But if you fill this thing up to the very edge and there's no room for anything, then when this goes from water to wine, well, now we've got a miracle. So he leaves no room for any understanding than that God just moved. And so this is what he's making clear to them. And then he says, now draw some out and take it to the master of the feast. So the servants carry what looks like an ordinary water across the room, and somewhere between filling it up and getting to the table, the miracle happens. And so they did what he said, and God shows up. Now let's finish these verses and then we'll bring this to an end. Verse 9 through 11. When the master of the feast tasted the water that now became wine and did not know where it came from, though the servants who had drawn the water knew, the master of the feast called the bridegroom and said to him, everyone serves the good wine first, and when people have drunk freely, then the poor wine. But you have kept the good wine until now. This is the first of his signs Jesus did at Cana in Galilee and manifested his glory, and his disciples believed him. So the servants bring the wine to the master, and the master has no idea where it came from. And we know it says the servants knew. And so the master calls him over and he says, look, this isn't how this is done. Because he's just trying to take his brain and understand what's happening. And he says, this isn't how we do things. You don't give the best last, you give the best first and then whatever is left. And so it's clear that he's not understanding what's happening. And that statement that he makes is the first statement that begins to reveal the point of this miracle. But before we really unpack that, I want to make sure you understand that these jars that were used, these were not just random jars laying around. They were what were called purification jars. So they held water used for ritual washing. So in this Jewish culture, people would wash before meals, worship, or certain activities. And why would they wash? Not just because they needed to clean their hands. That's not the point. They were washing because they were unclean. Not just unclean physically, but unclean spiritually. So these jars, these large, massive jars, represented the fact that no matter what I did, I would never be clean. Do you realize that? That's what they represented. They weren't just, he could have chose anything. But it wasn't an accident that he chose these jars. Because for the Jewish culture, they were on constant repeat. Wash, clean, and do it again. Wash, clean, and do it again. And so these jars represented that I needed to constantly be clean. But what they did not represent is how to actually be clean. Because if these jars could have cleaned me, I wouldn't need them anymore. I could wash and be done. And what Jesus is showing them is that he is the only one that actually could do it and it be done. So he's using this jar that represents my effort and work and flipping it up on his head and saying, if you want to be changed, it will be done through me and no other. And so when the master says, you're doing it in the wrong order, well, Jesus did it in the wrong order too. Because he brought the best last. But guess what? We wouldn't recognize the best until we had the worst. We had to have it bad to realize how good he wants to make it for us. And so he uses these jars to show. Because this wine, it wasn't just about, oh, look what I can do. I can make wine. That wasn't about the wine. It was about the power and the generosity of Jesus Christ. And the point of the whole miracle, it says, and those that were with him, what? Now began to see him more clearly. I love that I serve a God that would show up and do work in my life just so I could see him. Thousands and millions did not get to see this miracle. Just a few. But the few matter to God. And that's his generosity. His generosity isn't just for the important. Isn't just when a lot of people can get it. His generosity sees you right where you are and offers it. So now, let's kind of move forward. So we've looked at all these verses. We understand what's happening here better than we might have when we first walked in the room. But I just want to point a few things out. Because when you look at this story, almost everyone in this room misunderstood what was happening. The guest thought the groom planned the wine. They would have never been any wiser that the wine even changed. They just knew it didn't run out and they were happy about it. The master of the feast had no clue what was happening. He was completely confused, could not understand why anybody would do it this way. And so what we see is that really all that was happening is most of the people were just enjoying the moment without ever realizing what Jesus had done. And if you think about that in our culture, you think about that in our world, maybe even in your own life, that same thing happens. Jesus is present. He's working quietly, providing, protecting, changing things behind the scenes, and people enjoy the outcome without ever realizing the source of where it came from. But there was one person in that room that understood what was happening in a way that no one else did. And that was Mary. See, she knew exactly what to do. And her response gives us a clear picture of how we are to respond to the generosity of God. So this is how I want to end, is looking at the two ways she responded, and we'll bring it all to an end. But we see the first thing she did was what? She brought the need to Jesus. Now let me ask you something. So let's slow down. Because we've done the knowledge. So I'm going to push pause. I'm not trying to teach you anything you don't know, okay? We have a tendency to want to just learn, but for a second I need you to reflect. So think about your life for just a moment. What do you do when you begin to run out of something? And I don't mean gas or milk, but I mean what do you do when you begin to run out of patience? What do you do when you begin to run out of strength? What do you do when you begin to run out of peace or hope? Now, the question could be, what should we do? But I ask, what do you do? And maybe this isn't you, but sometimes what we do first is we try to fix it. What we do first is we think about it constantly. Maybe we even begin to talk about it with everyone who's around, and we carry it ourselves as long as we can. And eventually, somewhere down the line, we might go, I should pray about this. And I'm not saying that this is what we all do, but it is natural to do this. Why? Well, look, if every other relationship in our life is about what I do and what I get, why wouldn't we start to sometimes fall in the same trap of God? If I don't slow down and take my eyes off of me and take my eyes off of the people in my life, take my eyes off of all the things that life expects of me and focus on who God truly is, I will interact with him the same way I interact with you. And so then all of a sudden, I become resistant to taking him my needs. So when you look at this wedding story, you see Mary does something different. She takes her problem and she doesn't panic. She doesn't try to explain it. She doesn't even talk about it. She just says, here's my need, Jesus. And see, what we see here is that Mary knew where her help was. She didn't bring the problem to the crowd. She could have went to all the people in the wedding and say, hey, we're out of wine. We're going to be out of wine. You got any ideas? She didn't go to the bridegroom. She didn't go to the master. Where'd she go? Jesus. And so here's the question for you and I. What would it look like if we began to live like this week? If we begin to live like Mary this week? If this week we begin to bring our needs to Jesus, not after we've exhausted every other solution, but first. Not when our patience is running out, or when our patience is running out, we bring it to him. When our peace is running out, we bring it to him. When our strength is running out, we bring it to him. And look, I want to be clear. I know there are a lot of strong spiritual people in this room. And if I said someone in your life had cancer, you know exactly what to do. Get on your knees and pray. If I said that you were running out of money and you didn't know how to pay the bills, you would know exactly what to do and pray. But sometimes when we run out of the physical things that make us humans, we have a tendency to think that we've got to rely on our human physical nature to solve the problem. And maybe this isn't true about you, but I sat there this week and began to write this message realizing for the last 2 months, as I struggle with my confidence, as I struggle with people who I thought loved me turning their back on me or hurting me, and I felt empty inside. What I realized is the reason why the last 2 months was so hard was not just because people hurt me, was because I tried to fix the hurt on my own. And I didn't just say, hey, God, I'm running out of the ability to do this. I don't have any confidence right now. I'm not even sure if I'm in the right place right now. But instead, I talked about it a lot. Instead, I put a lot of effort. Instead, I thought about it more than I could even handle until God said, hey, you ready? And so the first thing Mary did was she brought her need to Jesus, period. She didn't bring her need to Jesus and help him with it. She didn't bring her need to Jesus and tell him what to do about it. She didn't bring her need to Jesus and then keep talking about it. She brought her need to Jesus and left it. And second, and this is where we'll end. First thing she did was bring her need to Jesus. Second, her response was do whatever he says. So the minute she brings the problem to him, she doesn't negotiate. She just looks to those beside her and says, do what he says. And she trusted Jesus before she understood Jesus. And I want you to understand that kind of trust doesn't appear out of nowhere. See, Mary had spent years watching Jesus, watching the way he lived, watching the way he responded, watching his wisdom and authority. Now, that doesn't mean she understood. That doesn't mean she fully knew what was going to happen. But because she had had a relationship with him, it impacted how she responded to him. And she had seen enough of who he was to trust him when she didn't know what to do. And so here's the question I have for us as we bring this to an end. I think this will come up on the screen. But what does your response to Jesus reveal about who he is to you? Because that moment, there's no doubt she already trusted him. She didn't just, trust doesn't happen in the moment. The trust happens before you ever got put in the situation. If I don't trust God when it's easy, I will not trust God when it's hard. The hard moment just reveals my trust. And see, the way we respond to his direction reveals what we believe about his character. She says, do what he says. What does that reveal? She believed he had the ability to do something special, whether or not she knew what he was going to do. And see, if we hesitate, maybe we aren't sure he can be trusted. If we delay, maybe we aren't sure his way is better. If we resist, maybe we're still holding on to control. But see, Mary knew that he was worth trusting. And so I just wonder today, do you believe he is worth trusting? If I don't see him clearly, I won't respond correctly. Some of us today aren't doing what God has called us to do because we don't believe or we don't see him as who he is. Mary had no doubt that he was worth trusting. So today, not only will you take your need to God, but will you do what he tells you to do. When you take your need and you say, Lord, I don't have enough. I'm empty. I'm anxious. Will you trust him? When he says to you, give me all your worries, will you? When he says pray about everything, will you? See, here's what I want you to understand. Most of us say, I don't know what God wants us to do, but if we would slow down long enough, we would realize that he's given us enough instruction to do plenty. He's given us the word. Because look, Mary didn't know fully who God was, but she knew enough to trust him. There are still plenty of things we don't know about God. We don't know about the future. We don't know what's going to come, but we know enough to trust him. He says, cast your worries on me. Will you? He doesn't say cast your worries on me and talk about them with every person you see. He doesn't say cast your worries on me and then create a to-do list of all the ways you're going to solve the problem. He says cast them on me and leave them. And so I just want to encourage you today, because I'm not standing up here as someone who has done this well. But I am standing up here today as someone who's done this week. Someone who has realized that I was empty, that I was preaching empty, that I was doing relationships empty, that I was doing friendships empty, that I was doing my life empty. And so I took my can to God and I said, Lord, I'm empty. I need you to fill it. And you know what he told me to do? He said, I need you to get silent this week. I said, not that. He said, I need you to put your earbuds away. Do you know, I thought about this, and I don't know if I told you this, but do you know that for at least 6 months, I haven't driven a car, taken a shower, walked the dog, or done any really chore or hobby without my earbuds in? I don't like admitting this, okay? I would prefer never to tell you any of this stuff. But I was living fully in the noise and still wondering why I couldn't be fulfilled or satisfied or experience joy. So God says, put them away and get quiet. Listen to me. The first 24 hours was miserable. It was hard. It was not hard when I was with people. It was hard when I laid down. It was hard. Look, I haven't gone to bed without them in my ear. I would fall asleep with them in my ear. And sometimes they would be good things in there. There'd be a good message or music. But guess what? Message and music isn't what leads me or guides me or fulfills me or transforms me. It's the Spirit of God. And so all I'm saying, I actually prefer to stop talking about me. But I'm telling you, if you're going to take your need to him, then you have to do what he tells you to do, because the miracle was on the other side of obedience. They had to take the jug, fill it up, and then walk to the table. And that's when the miracle happened. If you stay still right where you are and complain about the problem and don't do what God has called you to do, don't be disappointed when he doesn't make a miracle in your life. And I'm not standing here saying that God's going to give you millions of dollars. I'm not standing here saying that God's going to heal all your wounds. What I am saying is he knows what you need better than you'll ever know it. And that need is the one he'll meet. It may not be what you think. Because I did not go to him and say, hey, help me with putting down my earbuds. I didn't ask for that. I didn't want that. But he knew that the things that were empty weren't going to get filled in the midst of the noise. So what I'm asking you this week is, will you be like Mary and recognize your need, take it to Jesus, and then do what he calls you to do? Let's pray. Lord, I thank you for who you are. I thank you for your word. Lord, I'm aware that I'll never fully understand any of your character. But I do know the more I understand it, the better I respond to it. So God, this week I pray we'll focus on your generosity. And we'll realize that it's greater than I ever could imagine. And it sees me in a way that I don't see me. And it knows my needs in a way that I don't know my needs. So Lord, this week, make us aware of what's empty. Lead us to you and help us to let go. Help us to give you the areas of our life that are empty without asking you or telling you how to fill them back up. And then wait and be obedient when you tell us what to do. I thank you for who you are. I thank you that the greatest act of generosity was not turning water into wine, but it was how you took Jesus, put him on a cross, gave his life, and then raised him from the dead. The water into wine was just a glimpse of how generous you are. The cross was the greatest display of your generosity. Lord, let us rest in the greatest act of generosity you've ever given us. And so when we start to doubt, and when we start to worry, and when we start to think that we can't fix it, remember what you did on that cross and realize that your generosity has zero limits. Thank you, Lord, for who you are. In Jesus' name, amen. All right. Well, thank you all for being here. I'll see you next week.